So hi, Greg, and thank you so much for being on our show. We like to talk to super successful entrepreneurs as yourself, and but more we want to go to the basics because like how you started, how you went from where literally. I know that you were in college and you met your friend, and then you decided to do this to do Zoomcar. So tell us about those times, how it all began.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think so. For me, for Zoomcar, I would say it's a very sort of organic journey. I would say it's a very sort of long tail, long build up, if you will. So, it was one of those things where it wasn't like an overnight where we said, okay, we want to go and build, a platform, build a company, out of India and, build something for the emerging markets. It was more of sort of like a 5, 6, 7, 8 year sort of gradual sort of realization that there was something for us potentially to do. And I think from my personal lens, so it goes back maybe even before my days in college, but I was always very passionate about the environment and very passionate about cities, having grown up in New York and having traveled a lot as a kid, especially to more kind of exotic places, I would say, as a New Yorker. But and then in college, I actually studied India and China and emerging markets more generally. I was focusing on international relations and finance academically, and then coming out of school. I happened to have. I was at a school where it was quite diverse, and there were a lot of people from Asia, from Middle East, from Africa. So it was a good mix to get like kind of a personal flair for the emerging markets. And then coming out of school, I spent 5 years working in investment banking and private equity for really with a focus on emerging markets, a strong focus on India, strong focus in Southeast Asia, et cetera. And that was actually thematically tied to ESG, so clean tech, renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, et cetera, stuff like. And so it was actually that intersection of finance with the environmental aspects and making impacts on cities. So it was kind of exactly what my interests wanted to align and go towards. And having said that, I realized kind of after a few years that it was really tough to kind of keep doing things on the financial side because you just were moving very slowly because a lot of what you were doing was kind of working with governments and working with the public sector to influence change. And I was feeling very strongly at the time that if you wanted to really move the needle, you would have to kind of do something on your own through technology, through software, build a consumer internet, build a platform, do a service product, if you will. And that would be a much more powerful way of influencing and being really a change agent, I would say overall. And
When was the first time that you and you thought of something like Zoomcar, and then you broached it? How did the whole conversation? Did your friend come up with the idea? Did you come up? How did it all happen? Where was it? Was it in a dorm, or was it in a coffee shop? How did it happen?
well, no, that's what I'm getting to. So yeah. So the point is that kind of there's a realization that if you wanted to make a powerful impact, you would have to do something on your own. You have to do something in consumer internet, in tech, and so we started to survey the broader landscape in emerging markets and saw that transportation mobility was going to be the best sector to do that because it was something that was not governed as much by the public sector. It was more privately driven. You could actually influence it more from a consumer internet standpoint. And that was kind of the broad-based idea. And so it was really about, how you move the needle. And so then you kind of started to drill down into the transportation and mobility side and looking out across emerging markets, across the top 25 emerging markets. All of these countries are 50 million plus people, as you would expect, very large countries, India included. India, of course, being the largest of all these. And so that was actually the reason why we looked at India, because it was the largest, and we had good, strong personal networks in India. But the language, obviously, it's a lot easier in India. Given English is the main lingua franca, and then the fact that it's the largest market opportunity. But we felt that by surveying the whole emerging market landscape, we saw in transport mobility the number one sort of broad overarching condition, if you will, was that only about 5% of people owned a private car, and so personal cars. The majority, 95% of people don't own a car in India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Egypt, etc. So, across emerging markets. So not just India, but again, India was by far the largest opportunity, the best place to start. And then of that, Bangalore being the best place within India to start and kick off. So that was kind of the process that we went through. But I think when it came to the opportunity, we saw that 5% owned the car, but yet the mass middle class, they wanted to have access to a car for say 2 or 3 times a month, because most people, whether it's India, whether it's Vietnam, Philippines, etc., they actually don't need a car for their day-to-day use. They need it 2 to 3 times a month. So maybe say 10, 15, 20 times in a year is when they really need a car. So in that context, there's no need to own a car actually, but a platform needs to exist to allow them access, right? So that was kind of the idea. And then on the supply side, we kind of realized that there already are literally millions of cars. In fact, if you look at the numbers in India alone, it's about 45 million cars throughout the whole country. Then you have across these emerging markets, in aggregate, you have about 175 million cars. Over the next couple of years, you'll probably hit closer to 200 million cars. So the point is that you have a huge amount of cars that are actually getting used only 1 or 2 hours a day. So it's less than 10% of the time the cars actually get used. So you're seeing most of the time, 90% plus, it's just sitting around collecting dirt, debris, dust. It's depreciating. And so we felt that there could be a platform that we could build and ultimately serve both sides, really allow these individual vehicle owners and the small medium businesses who own vehicles, allow them to rent out cars and monetize them and make more money, and have it more efficiently used. And then on the other side, we felt it was a great opportunity for people who wanted access to a car for a couple of hours or a couple of days for them to kind of get behind the wheel. So that was the idea, starting platform, etc. So I spent about 4 months in India before launching, just kind of doing a lot of the groundwork, and that was really helpful. I was also fortunate that I had traveled to a lot of other emerging markets as well, and so it's important to have that local touch and understanding. And so even now, as we're in international markets, I've tried to be traveling even during COVID. I've been traveling into those markets to the extent possible. So yeah, I think that part of it is definitely important.
But I would like to segue into an interesting question, which I always felt when I thought of Zoomcar. Even Indians find it difficult to interact with the Indian government and with the RTO and the transport organization. How did you, as a non-Indian, manage to break through the rules and manage to launch something in a country which can be slightly complex?
Yeah. I mean, look, I would say it's something which obviously took a lot of focus and intense discipline to just kind of keep at it and perseverance. But it's one of those things where ultimately you need to have a strong team in place, right? So I think with anything, it's always important to have the right folks in the right places at the right times. And for what it's worth, I thought we definitely emphasize that and focus there as an input lever. And I think we were fortunate that we had at least to start, we had pretty deep personal networks in India, as I mentioned, and we were able to leverage that. And kind of one thing leads to the next. And I said it was pretty organic, but we ultimately got to people who, or were introduced to people who then had the necessary mix of skills, background, experience, who could actually help us with that process. So I think it's really, again, at the end of the day, it's just people, right? So you're just interacting, you're just engaging with people. So I think just, getting folks, who can relate to the people that you're speaking with, I think is always helpful. I mean, obviously, having a person speak the same local language is important. So in our case, there's Canada, because we're in Bangalore. But yeah, I mean, I think that it was really just about getting to the right people who could help us to ensure that we could help the overall objective.
But getting back to my original question, how did the whole idea come about? What really happened? You and your friend, how did you one day broached the topic of, oh, we'll start a rental car business in India. How did that happen?
Well, no,
What are the
that's what I just explained, right? No, I'm saying that whole process, that I just went through. I mean, that's exactly what happened. So it's not. I think it's very rare that entrepreneurs, you don't have like a light bulb moment. It's very rare that it's like one day it's like, oh, you can wake up and be like, I'm going to do that. I mean, yeah, maybe with some people it's like that, but yeah, it's definitely not the case for us. I mean, it was a long tail. As I said, it was a very organic sort of process. It was a journey that took place over, I mean, several years, and the thoughts were evolving obviously for years. It wasn't like one day we said, we're gonna go and do something. I think I always had a inkling that I would want to do something of my own, going back to my time in college. But it's not like I was scouring every day, thinking what am I going to do? I mean, that's not generally a very advisable practice because it's very forced. I think it has to be organic. It has to be natural. So I think that was the case.
You knew each other for quite a few years. This, like, you were both discussing it for quite a few years before this happened.
Well, I mean, so my co-founder, so he was with us for about a year, and then he exited the business. But so yeah, we were friends from college. So we knew each other for a long time there. So we knew each other for 6-7 years, a little bit longer. But we started to, we were always discussing these themes, right? And so I think it was more just about the themes and understanding, what are the problem statements and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. So, it's not like you don't sit in a room and go to a whiteboard and say we're gonna do this, right? I mean, it's a very organic process. So it's not like there's one conversation necessarily where everything evolves at one time. So it's more just of a natural evolution over time.
So, what about your first funding process? Like, did you one day sit and like, okay, let's make a business plan? How did that evolve? How did you? What were the first few days? How did you? How did that evolve? Did you look up how a business plan is made? Did you do a Google search, or how did that happen? How did you evolve your first PowerPoint presentation?
Right. Yeah. So no, not exactly. I mean, well, no, I think as you probably heard from my background, I think one thing I was fortunate. I had a background in investment banking and private equity, and so having been on the finance side actually does prepare you actually pretty well for that. At least for any investor engagement, because I was on the other side investing in companies and projects, etc. So I kind of already had a pretty good flair and feel for that. And then as a banker, you're obviously working with clients who will go before other investors, etc. So in terms of the nature and the essence of a presentation, a PowerPoint, investor deck, if you will, that was something which was already pretty well known to me, because I had kind of been doing it, in various ways for 5 years. So that made it, I'd say much more second nature. So I think compared to maybe some other folks in India where their backgrounds would have been in tech, in engineering or product, etc. So I think that way I probably had a bit of an advantage. And so that really helped. So yeah, for that, it was just more, kind of looking and thinking back on the standardized formats I put together. I think, more than the exact format or structure. I mean, yeah, of course that's helpful, but at the end of the day, it's the content that matters. So yeah, everyone obviously different format and structure, but the content and really prioritizing that and focusing on the right elements. I think also from my days of banking, that really helped because then it's much easier to kind of think through what's really relevant, what's really important. I mean, there's a lot you can put out there on a page. Most of it's not relevant. It's the secret, the trick is, getting to the essence, getting to the core of it, and staying and focusing on that.
So, what were the greatest challenges? Did people, when you presented this to funders, financiers, did they probably didn't believe in you from the word go, and like what were the challenges in convincing people that this was a viable idea in India?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that we were not Indian, the fact that particularly I was not Indian, was definitely making it really much tougher because it's a higher bar. But I would say there was a clear, also just to call out, right? There was a clear distinction between investors in India and investors in the U.S. I think it was a lot easier at that time to convince investors in the U.S. Because I think most of them realized that India was a rapidly growing emerging market, and then when we told the story about some of the challenges around transportation, it was very easy for them to believe that. And I think it just, even if they hadn't visited India, they had obviously read about India, seen pictures, and so they can relate. They can understand that it's very dense. The cities are very hustling and bustling, very big. You have a lot of people who are in the middle class who are not necessarily be able to afford a vehicle. So I think all of that makes it very easy and straightforward for people in the US. I think in India, the bigger challenge was that, and that's, by the way, that's why we raised all the money in the US initially. But I think in India, it was more of probably a challenge where they figured, okay, well, they haven't seen many foreign entrepreneurs, and this is a business that there's a pretty strong offline component as well. So I think it was probably more just a higher burden of proof.
Right. I really find it interesting that didn't people tell you, were there any particular incidents which, if you were going to write your biography or an autobiography, there must be certain interesting conversations or instances which really stick out in your mind when you try to convince people. Like I know I read about how your first customer, or not customer exactly, but your first car supplier apparently was from Bangalore. The barber who has now a couple of Rolls Royces and all. So any interesting instances when you were trying to set up, a foreigner coming into India saying he wants to do car rental? I'm sure.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. No, look, definitely. I mean, I think, it depends if you're talking about investors or partners. I think, investors, maybe not as many colorful anecdotes, but certainly, those are usually a little bit more cut and dry conversations. But on the actual sort of business partner side, we certainly have had quite a few highly varied conversations, and yeah, I think what you're saying, yes, there's one particular case, like when we launched in Bangalore, I think the biggest challenge was getting a supplier who had the license to operate, and because we couldn't get the license ourselves to operate, so we were going to leverage someone else, and so there were only about 5 players out there globally. Sorry, 5 players, not globally, 5 players locally in India who actually had the license, and so we went to all 5. And the first 4 basically said this is not very interesting to us, and so it was really, it was, at that point, it was pretty frustrating because we just thought that why would you not want to involve yourself here? There's nothing really to lose. We were not asking for any investment per se, and then there was obviously going to be a revenue share, partnership share. So yeah. Having said that, like players like Cars on Rent, Avis, Oryx, these type of players, Car Club at the time. So these players we all approached, and they were either not responsive or met and just didn't want to engage or do anything there. So that was challenging. So I thought it was going to be tough because we felt it was going to be over before it began. But then fortunately there's one more player who actually had a license, and that person was this guy Ramesh Babu. So as you said, he's kind of the billionaire barber. That was his moniker, if you will. And so he started off as a barber, got into the car rental, employee transport space, if you will. And he was known for having a couple of luxury cars, as you said, some Rolls Royces, Bentleys, and some of that. But then, I think he was the last chance for us. So we had to kind of structure and secure something with him. Otherwise, there's no way of getting to launch. And so, I still remember, like the first time that we met, I actually somehow I got really sick the night before. So some like viral I think 104 fever, and it was all of a sudden. It was very strange, and it ended up going away in a day. But the day I was supposed to meet him, I had 104 fever. And so, but I realized that I couldn't obviously skip the meeting, because at that point, we had to get something structured. And, it was kind of later in December. It was actually December 23rd. And I was actually, I'd been in India at the time for like 2.5 months. And actually it was 3.5 months actually at the time. And, we realized that ultimately, if we're not able to kind of structure a partnership deal with Ramesh, then it didn't make sense to continue in India, because there was just no way of starting our business. So I mean, obviously we were very keen and wanted to start, but beyond the point, if there was no path to operating in terms of a license, then we figured it didn't make sense to just start the business and then get kind of shut down. So I think that was the main thought. And so, fortunately, I ended up meeting Ramesh, and I remember we met at the club. There was this boring club. Interesting, yeah. I haven't been inside in a couple of years. I played tennis there a couple of times. But yeah. So they have it was a nice club. So we were by the pool. So I think it was there, and it was by the pool area, and he took me for a drink, and so I had like a typical like Indian whiskey, and then I was still very feverish. I think at that time my fever maybe reduced to 102 or so, 102, 103, but I was still like not in very good shape. But then I ended up having a hour and a half, 2 hour meeting, and we were able to kind of reach an agreement on in principle, hatching agreement on how to structure something on the way forward. And we were very fortunate there, because had we not been able to structure something, I would have packed up and gone back to the U.S. Because ultimately it really didn't make sense, obviously, as I said, to keep going if we couldn't get that in place. And so I was going to go back to business school. I had taken a leave of absence, a semester leave of absence, so I hadn't dropped out entirely at that point. But then once we saw the visibility that we're going to have the structure in place, then we said, well, look, it doesn't make sense to continue on with business school. So at that point, I officially dropped out over Christmas, and then I did fly back to the US for 2 weeks for the holidays, and then I came back to India thereafter, and in January. And so at that point, we kind of had like a 30-day sprint to kind of get all the blocking and tackling done around the agreement and some of the cars, etc. And then later on into February, into March, we ended up kicking off and doing a soft launch officially with 7 cars, and going from there. So it was quite, I'd say, really frenetic and hectic initially, and we were very close to just not being. We were literally a day away from not being able to start.
Oh, so I was given half an hour, and I have used up all my time. But before you go, I really would like to have one question. You talked about frustration. I'd like to know how you deal with frustration, and because obviously you have to have a very tough mind to manage an Indian business, a car rental business, a business which is a connect between the physical and the technology. I mean, this is normally businesses are only technology, but in this case there's a very strong physical footprint, so you have probably problems every day. How do you manage frustration?
Yeah, I mean, frustration is part of life. I mean, it's definitely part of the startup journey for sure. And so you'll have a lot of frustration. So I think first off, you have to realize that that comes with the territory, right? So you're going to have a huge amount of frustration. So I think it's about preparing yourself mentally up front, so you're not surprised when that comes. That's the norm, and you should expect that as the default. And that's the base case. If you're not ready for that mentally, you should go and sign up. You shouldn't do it in the first place. So I think that really helps. I mean, half the battle is knowing that you are going to get really frustrated, and that's normal, and that's fine. So I think really half the battle is just that. I'd say the other half is you have to have obviously a mix of people in your life, whether it's friends or mentors or advisors, or maybe it's your spouse or whatever it is, right? But you need to have kind of an outlet of people in your life. Probably not your parents, because they're not the best outlets in something like this. But so you need to have those sort of personal nodes, if you will, personal connects, that can help with some of this. And then finally, I think we need to have, and this is where it's tougher for entrepreneurs, because we have so little time. It's always a paucity of time because you're working so much and you're all in. But I think trying to have one or two areas of interest outside, where we'll call it hobbies or interests, passions, whatever you want to call it, where you can kind of have an outlet for an hour, 2 hours. You're obviously not going to have a lot of time to do something consistently, but some outlet where you can go, whether it's sports or
practice meditation or something like that.
No, I don't. No,
Okay.
So I've never been into meditation. I mean, I tried it a couple of times, but it's just not for me at all. I'm a much more of an active doer, so I like to always be doing something engaging. But I mean, so not meditation for sure for me. But I see the value for some people, and everyone has a different outlet. I mean, but that's a perfect example. So if meditation's our outlet, that's great. For me, I'm more about sports or music, so I think that's more important from my lens. But I think everyone has to have, I think, at least one or two outlets to kind of sop up that I would say excess, that frustration, if you will. So I think that's critical.